Hey, spiritual warriors. I am back today talking about such an important topic. And I had the download this morning that I needed to talk about this. So it really feels like there's a lot of people who need this information because I usually go into my records in the morning and ask my guides, like, what does my community need to hear? What do people need right now to support them in their ascension, and how can I help? Right? That's the main questions I ask. And I got this big download around birth, right? And this is something that I kind of forget about sometimes because I'm so used to doing it, which is kind of funny because this is kind of the first place I go with my clients. And sometimes I forget to talk about it because it's just something I've been doing for such a long time and started having these experiences right when I first started doing breath work around remembering what it was like in my mother's womb and all of these other crazy memories that I had in my initial breathwork sessions, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But yeah, so I got this really strong download this morning that there's a lot of people in this community that could benefit from this information. So I really want to share this with you now. So, why is the birth story so important? Um, and let's just get clear on what the birth story is first, right? So, the birth story is the circumstances around your birth. So, that would include the actual birth, right? The day of your birth, the actual time when you were born out of your mother, and what circumstances surrounded that, what type of birth you had, what was the energy around that day, what was the energy between your parents, what was the energy like in the hospital or wherever you were born. And then also included in this would be everything that happened from your point of conception into the whole time that you were in your mother's womb, right? What were the circumstances in the world that were impacting your parents? What was the relationship like between your mother and father? What outside things were impacting them, right? Did they have a healthy relationship? Were they arguing? What was impacting them, right? So because that will give you a lot of key insights into the way that you look at the world, right? Because your mother's consciousness, especially your mother's consciousness, but also your father's consciousness, impact the way that you feel about the world, right? And the decisions that you made when you were pre-verbal. So these decisions, these feelings, these unconscious beliefs that you created about the world really start at conception. Right. And then obviously there are factors from past lives that come in, but that's another topic. And if you feel like there are past life things impacting you, then I would grab that last Akashic Records reading with me and we can dive into that. But no, right now I just want to focus on your birth in this lifetime. Okay. So, yes, so from your point of conception and even the circumstances around your conception, right? So, was it planned? Were your parents planning on conceiving a child at that time? Were they in love? Did they know each other, right? All of these things impact what you feel about the world, especially what you feel about relationships and how you take on new endeavors, right? Whether it's a new project, a new job, a new phase in your life, anything new, the way you start it, its conception, you will be able to trace that back to your conception, right? So let me just give you an example. So for me, I was planned, right? Like my parents knew they wanted to have a child. They knew they wanted to get pregnant essentially. So my conception was very planned. My mother was tracking her like cycle or whatever to make sure that it was the right circumstances, right? So for me, when I do things, part of the way I go into the conception of something new is I do it in a very planned, very thought out way, right? So that's just an example of the conception and how that impacts, but there are so many other factors, right? And I'm going to get into that in a minute. Um, right. So your circumstances around your birth, aka your birth story, was your first experience of this world in this lifetime. So those factors are going to impact you. These were the first beliefs that you created about what this world is, and it was before you were able to speak. So these are frequencies, right? This is not a linear thought. This is not a thought that is in words, right? It's a frequency. It's a frequency that you are holding in your body that is most likely tying you to a lower vibrational frequency. So, why this is so important around ascension is when we are ascending, when we are stepping into a higher state of consciousness, we need to release anything that is still holding us into this lower frequency, this lower state of consciousness. And a lot of times, the circumstances around our birth are holding us to that lower frequency because of whatever happened during that time. And I'm going to get into that more. Okay, so some things to consider, right? I mentioned the circumstances when you were in the womb, right? So, what was going on in the world and how were your parents impacted by that? Were they struggling in some way? Were they fighting? Did they even know each other? Did they have a good relationship? Were there other kids? Was there violence going on? Like, what was happening when you were in the womb? Okay, so important to know those details. And also, one thing I'm going to mention off the bat, and I'll probably repeat this, is I always have my clients fill out like this birth worksheet around what happened during their birth. And I say, you know, you can interview your mother or your father, and that's great. It's great to ask them, but also trust your intuition about it, right? Because a lot of times our parents will have one version of events, but they can't capture the way that you felt about it, right? They're telling you how they felt about it. Like, for instance, my mom would have told me, oh, everything was fine, you know, like I had an epidural, but it was like a great birth. But really, when I went back and re-experienced my own birth during a breathwork session, I realized that I took on my mother's overwhelming anxiety and neurosis. So to me, it was not just a fine experience, right? Because I took on that consciousness of really overwhelming anxiety. Okay, does that make sense? So let me know if you guys have questions so far, or if you're with me or want to share any experiences that are coming up for you. I'd be happy to respond. So, anyway, yes, so you have to be aware of, yes, it's great to ask people, but also trust your intuition about it. If you feel like you felt a certain way at that time or you took on something during that time, you're right. Trust that, right? Trust your intuition, trust your inner knowing and your feelings around this. Okay, so it's also really important to look at how your actual birth went, right? How were you actually born? Was it a C-section? Were there any complications? Were you induced? Did you have the cord around your neck? Was there a lot of drugs during your birth, right? All of these things can impact the way that you live your life now. For instance, I'll just give you like some typical things, but C-section babies tend to skip right to the end of things instead of going through a process, or they tend not to finish things, right? My husband, I don't want him to hear me right now, but he is a typical C-section baby. He has trouble finishing things, right? So it's really important to look at those factors. Sometimes if you were induced, you could have felt like you were being rushed, right? And now you hate feeling like you're being rushed, or you feel uncomfortable going through starting something new. You feel like you're being rushed, or you feel like you're not able to do things in the time that you would like to do them, right? And all of these things, all of these circumstantial things impact us differently. I'm just giving you some broad examples of how you could internalize these factors that impacted you during your birth, okay? So looking at those things, sometimes if you're older, this doesn't happen a lot anymore, but they use forceps to pull babies out. So they would actually like take a thing and like pull you out by your head. That could impact you in many different ways. So really important to look at those factors and see how they impacted you on an intuitive level, like really asking yourself how that impacted you. And you can get clearer on that through breath work, but you can just start to intuit how these factors have impacted you, okay? Okay, and then also looking at the energy around your birth. And I touched on this a little bit, but what was the environment like that you were born into, right? Was it an emergency situation, right? Where they thought there was going to be something wrong with you, where maybe it was a cord around the neck and they thought you were going to die, or maybe they lost your, what is it called? Your heartbeat, and they weren't sure if you were going to make it, right? All of these things impact the way that you look at the world and the anxiety that you might have taken on. We all internalize it differently, right? Some people will turn it into, oh, I have to be perfect, or oh, I have to make sure that I'm fully in control of everything all the time, right? So looking at the energy around it. And I just want to say this because this is so common. It's so common for our birth situations to be really traumatic, right? Unless your mom was like totally in tune with her body, had a water birth, or had a really conscious birth, most likely you were impacted by some sort of anxiety, some sort of fear, being born in a hospital. And a lot of times, especially if you're older, um, you know, they didn't put babies on chests at all, and they kind of treat it as like a medical procedure rather than like, a beautiful miracle. So it's really important to look back on exactly what the energy was, and then looking at how that energy really flows into the rest of your life and how it impacts the way that you view the world. And I'm going to give some examples of that in a little bit, okay? So the other thing that's really important to note is the newborn baby, and even before that, which I kind of touched on, you will take on your mother's consciousness. So this is really important to remember, because even if you're one of those people that says like, oh, my mom and I are completely different people, we're cool, whatever, like, you take on your mother's consciousness. And until you get really, really conscious and do the work to separate yourself from it, it will come in and run you on autopilot more than you'd like to admit. And so it's really important. Like, for example, for me, like I kind of mentioned, I took on my mother's consciousness and neurosis and really bad anxiety, and that showed up for me in a bunch of different ways. But it's really important it was really important for me to understand that, and understand when her consciousness kind of comes in and takes over, and learning that that's not me, and learning how to separate my own energy from hers. This is really important, guys, and this is what I do a lot of work on with my clients, especially in my immersion, the metamorphosis, because it's so important to be able to separate your mother's consciousness, which you took on at birth, and your own consciousness, which is what you came in this world to be. And once you can kind of understand the separation between those two, it's super empowering, because then you can have the awareness to say like, oh, I'm going into that old energy and I'm going to say no to that. I'm going to choose out of that. And then through breath work, you can physically release that energy from the body once you become conscious of it, right? So that's really important to note, is that you do take on the energy, the consciousness of your mother, especially while you're in the womb. Okay. All right. So, and I just wanted to share the story of one of my clients who just started the metamorphosis. And when you come in, the first thing we work on is your birth story, right? And she started unraveling the story around her birth, had all of these amazing aha moments where she started to understand where her anxiety comes from and where her perfectionism comes from, and really, like, had a lot of ahas. And then she started to get all these downloads of hearing her mother's voice in her head, and hearing all these little things that her mom used to say, all these little sayings that were kind of these unconscious beliefs that she then took on about herself, that she was operating from, right? So say her mother told her that she was that she wanted attention all the time. I don't remember what all of them were, so I'm just making stuff up. Or her mother told her that she was too scared to do something, or her mother told her, oh, you'll never be able to handle going on a trip by yourself, or you have too many fears to do this, right? She started remembering all of these things that her mom used to say all the time and realizing that she was literally operating on these beliefs that her mother like instilled in her being. And until she started doing the work and doing the breath work to uncover these unconscious beliefs, they were kind of running, right? And she was unconsciously operating from this place. But now that she started to do the work around her birth and her relationship with her mother, she was able to become conscious of all of these things and slowly release them. And now she's uncovering totally new aspects of herself that she never knew were there, because she's now operating from her own soul, her own being, instead of allowing these unconscious beliefs that she took on from her mother to kind of drive the bus in a lot of ways. Okay, so let me know if this is resonating. Let me know if that makes sense. Okay, and then the other thing I just want to note here too is when we go through the process of ascension, and especially if you are someone who's a healer and you're helping people, sometimes it can be easy to glaze over continuing to do the work around the relationship with your parent. I don't want to say work, I hate that word, to go through the process or the journey of uncovering the aspects of your relationship with your mother and your relationship with the circumstances around your birth, because you can say, okay, well, I'm just going to live in a higher frequency, right? I'm just going to rise above that and ascend. And what I want to say is two things. A, it's impossible to ascend into a higher frequency if you're still holding on to this lower vibrational frequency in the form of your mother's consciousness when she was carrying you, in the form of these beliefs about yourself that you took on from your parents that are not in resonance with your highest self, right? So it's so important to continuously go back and look at these old thoughts and old frequencies that we continue to hold on to from our parents. And I have been doing this work for 20 years. And yesterday, I just released a huge piece around my relationship with my mother that I was still holding on to. So it's layered. You will release what you are ready to release at any given time, and you continue to go back to it, because every time you will be ready to release even more and ready to ascend to whatever the next level is for you. Okay, so I just want to emphasize that this work is so important no matter what level you're at in your ascension process. Even if you are someone who is working at a higher level and as a healer and helping people ascend, this work is an ongoing journey. Okay, so that's really, really important to note. So I just wanted to share some of my experiences remembering being in the womb during breathwork sessions, because this is really, really cool. I've uncovered a lot around my own birth story that has really helped me gather the puzzle pieces to understanding what is blocking me in my own growth and ascension, and why the circumstances around my birth impacted me so much. So when I first discovered breathwork when I was 19, I had a lot of experiences around remembering how I felt in the womb, and actually remembering what it felt like to be in the womb, and remembering feeling my mother's energy of really bad neurosis and anxiety. And I don't want to keep harping on my mother's anxiety. She's an amazing person, but really bad anxiety and neurosis. But anyway, so I took that on in the womb. I had actual tangible memories of it during a breathwork session, during multiple breathwork sessions, where I was able to then break apart my mother's consciousness and my consciousness. So I was able to really be able to pinpoint when I was going into my mother's consciousness and when I was in my own. Okay, so let me know if that makes sense. So I had all of this come up during breathwork sessions. Which is really, really cool. And a lot of people will have memories of their birth or around the circumstances around their birth during a breathwork session, because this is like our first experience of the world, our first experience of taking a breath, right? The day you were born is the first experience you had of taking a breath. So when you consciously focus on your breathing, you will at some point be brought back to that moment of, oh, this is the first time I took a breath, and this is what it felt like, and this is what was happening, right? And if it was filled with fear and anxiety, then naturally you might associate breath, life, aliveness with fear and anxiety. And a lot of us do in an unconscious way, because like I said, a lot of us have had some fear and anxiety around our birth. Okay. And then, oh, okay. So my birth story, I just wanted to get into that a little bit, and just so you guys can have an understanding of how the circumstances can impact you. So really quick, the circumstances around my birth were, my parents were both teachers, and they were on the biggest teacher strike that there ever was here in Philadelphia. It was like 4 months long, where the teachers were on strike and they didn't work. So my parents literally had zero money. They were making no money. They were super worried and scared because they didn't know when they were going back to work, and they were about to have a baby. So as you could imagine, there was a lot of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty on the time leading up to my birth. And then I really had to go back and uncover why I had all of this fear, anxiety, uncertainty, especially around money, especially around abundance. And I really had to go back and clear this in a major way. And interestingly enough, it came up for me when I was pregnant with my son, who's my first child. And when I was pregnant with him, all of a sudden, all of these feelings, all of these memories came up around when I was in my mother's womb and the circumstances that were impacting my parents. And I was able to release a lot of it through breath work. And I was able to completely transform my relationship with money and abundance after I was able to look at those circumstances and how they impacted my subconscious beliefs around money, abundance, around feeling supported and safe, right? So these things are so important to become conscious of. Okay, so yeah, so all of these things, all of these circumstances are what is essentially happening when we don't clear them, is that they are anchoring us into a lower frequency, right? And again, when we talk about ascension, we are raising our frequency, right? So, and this is why I keep saying, I keep getting this major download that breath work is the most essential tool for ascension, because the benefits are twofold. We're literally using the breath to raise our vibration, and at the same time physically releasing from the body the energy that is holding us in this lower vibration. So those old circumstances, the circumstances around our birth, the old beliefs, like I was telling you about my client downloading all of those old beliefs from her mother that were circulating in her consciousness, right? When we breathe, hi Laurie, when we breathe, we literally raise our frequency and release that lower frequency, right? So that's why it's so important to really get clear on all this stuff and then release it through the breath, okay? Okay, so I just, again, I wanted to talk a little bit about the results that people see when they do uncover their birth story and release it. So like I mentioned, in my 8-week immersion, the metamorphosis, the first thing we cover is uncovering your birth story. And then I have a really powerful breathwork session to support you in releasing that energy, right? So we literally uncover the whole thing, and then we transform it, transmute it, and release it through the breath. So what has happened with my clients, especially lately, and this is so fun, is when they go through this process of uncovering and releasing their birth story, they literally find new aspects of themselves that they never knew were there. Like my one client realized that she wanted to do some completely different things with her life, that she had talents that she had not been allowing herself to access because she was living in this cycle, this lower vibrational cycle, right? Um, my clients are connecting to their psychic abilities really easily and really quickly. So I've been finding that once they start to unravel the story around their birth and the story around the relationship with their mother, they automatically get like super tuned into their intuition and psychic abilities, which is really, really fun. And I find that all the clients that are attracted to me do have really strong psychic abilities. My one client realized that she can heal people with her hands. Like, I mean, it's amazing what you uncover when you start to release these lower frequencies that are tying you to the past. And the biggest ones are around your birth and around your mother, and sometimes around your father too. You know, your primary caregivers, but your mother is super important because, like I said, you do take on her consciousness in the womb. Okay. Um, okay, so yes, they're all connecting with their psychic abilities, which is super fun. And then the other things that are happening is like new relationships that are completely healthy and in alignment for them. One of my clients, after starting the immersion, she got into a completely new relationship that was like totally in alignment for her after saying no really easily to a relationship that was not in her highest good, right? So these are just the things that happen once we start to really release these old energies. And also more abundance. My clients who have done my abundance activation bundle, which is breath work that's specifically around abundance, but also the ones in my metamorphosis course have really begun to align with more abundance. And I'm going to share their testimonials soon, but it's really mind blowing the results that we get, just really when we begin to shift our frequency, right? And that's all it is. We are shifting our frequency into higher states of consciousness so we're able to tap into that infinite abundance of the universe and align with what is truly right for us and truly in alignment with our mission on this planet. Okay, with your mission on this planet. And you already know what that is. If you're questioning that, you already know what that is. But it becomes more and more clear as we do this work, and you discover more and more aspects of it as you continue to raise your frequency through the breath. So super amazing. Um, it's just really almost magical. It is magical what happens when we uncover this story and begin to release it. So if you want to know more about releasing your birth story, that's what we do in the metamorphosis in my 8-week immersion. So if that's something that is resonating with you, I know every client that reaches out to me is like, I was looking for a sign and I found you, or I was looking for what's next and I found you. So usually it's like an intuitive knowing that you're supposed to work with me. And if what I'm saying is resonating with you, then just reach out to me. Let's talk about how we can move forward with your ascension. So yeah, it's just so fun, and it's so magical to watch everyone's ascension and process and understanding how your birth story really impacts you and how releasing it can just give you mind-blowing results. It's so fun. Okay, so unless anyone has any questions, I am going to hop off. But oh yes, and I have one more space for an Akashic Records reading. An Akasha Records activation, I'm calling it, because I really do feel like we activate higher states of consciousness during these sessions. So it's so fun. If that is resonating with you, or like I said, if you're interested in looking at past lives or other blocks that are impacting you, we can access those in the records. So there's a link here to grab that last space if that is resonating with you. But I would love to hear from you, so reach out to me, and I can't wait to talk to you soon. All right, bye.